At this time, I'd like to call the Monday, March 10th, 2014 Planning Commission meeting to order. That brings us to the first item on the agenda, which is roll call. Pidd, here. Price.
Here.
Longton.
Here.
Emma. Charnell.
Here.
And Shovlin.
Here.
And that brings us to the next item, which is the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
I've got a motion by Mr. Price and a second by Ms. Charnell. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to number 4, which is the approval of the minutes from the February 10th, 2014 Planning Commission meeting.
I move that we approve them.
Got a
Second.
motion by Mr. Longton and a second by Mr. Price. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is public input. Citizens may speak to issues not on the agenda. Please, before speaking, give your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Anybody here for something that's not already listed on this? All right, we'll move on. That brings us to the public hearings. At this time, I'd like to open the conditional use permit for the mural at Brewster's.
Good evening. Do I need to sign in? Yes, please. Steve Davilo, representing the Cannon Falls Historical Society. We're talking about a mural that we hope to paint this summer on the south side of the Brewster building. I've given you each a little packet. I don't know if Mike's doing anything with the image thing here today, but the first image is of the wall as it sits right now with the dumpster in front of it. And we had not planned to do murals this summer, but that wall just sort of kept asking for a picture. And then if you've been down to our museum, you'll notice that we have pictures all over the walls, upstairs, downstairs, in the stairway and stuff. And a picture jumped out that just asked to be painted. And I'm looking for, there it is, right there. That would be this picture right here. And I think last time I was down, you saw the actual original picture with the signatures and everything on it. There, that's different, isn't it? So that's the wall as it sits right now. And this is a cropped photo of the picture that I had down here a few months ago. It was taken from up on the hill near the wellhead and where we have the cable tower. And many of those people in this photo have relatives that still live in Cannon Falls. In fact, I've actually had some phone calls. The one that I enjoy the most is this child sitting on the top of this motorcycle right here is known as Clint Lundberg. I don't know how many people remember Clint, but I knew him as a businessman in town here with the mortuary and the furniture store. So we started talking to a few people, and because of the process, Danny Lind and his kids were willing to put the mural texture board up that we use, similar to the board that was done on Eltoff's warehouse building, south wall. It's hardy board with a stucco texture. And so we will have, pending the permit, the wall paint ready when they get done putting the rest of the siding up. I was asked to do a little bit better Photoshop, so I called on my son here. Notice the cars are gone on this one as well as the dumpster. And everything is to scale on this particular photo. The plywood area is 5 foot and 1/4 inches vertical, and that gave us a limit. And when we crop the mural, the longest that we could get the run on the mural is 22 feet and 22 and 1/4 feet. We also needed to leave room for the dynamic sign that Dan wants to put up there. Found out that sign is 5 foot 9 inches wide and 33 inches tall. And so that signage is to scale with the wall and the mural. The siding that Dan has might be a little bit wider than what my son grabbed off of another part of the photo and put up there. It's going to be roughly that color. And so what we did is we gave a 3 foot gap between the west end of that wall and what would be the west edge of that sign, and then did another 3 feet between the right edge of that sign and the left edge of the mural. Now the mural can be repositioned further over. We have more than enough wall there to do it. Having it towards the front makes it easier for people coming down 4th Street and gives us a little more height over anybody parking there, because that parking lot sort of goes uphill. So we're prepared to paint a mural on that wall this summer, provided we get the permit to do so. So if you have any questions.
Does anybody up here have any questions? Anybody out there have any questions about the mural? Comments? All right.
I have one more thing. I'll just have fun with the board just a little bit. Along with the packet this time, I did leave a application of membership to the Historical Society. We're they're cutting me off. If it is your joy, we will take the application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan? Because of the 4 public hearings that we've got tonight, I think it would be appropriate if the Planning Commission would move forward to Resolution 2014-1, which is the recommendation pertaining to the mural application. And if that's acceptable by motion and acceptance by the Commission, then Steve, if he wishes to leave, may. And we'll try to do that for the other 3 as well, handle the projects and then go to the resolution.
Okay, so I could move that we approve the conditional use permit for the mural at Brewster's.
Second.
I've got a motion by Mr. Longton and a second by Mr. Price. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is rezoning and preliminary plat for the Mulvihill property.
We saw previously a concept plan for about, let's call it 52 acres of property on the east side of Cannon Falls, south of Highway 19, and the high school property. We saw that last year conceptually. Glenn Mulvihill is here tonight, and Corey Meyer, his consultant, here tonight to present their request for rezoning the property and to do a preliminary plat for the entire almost 52-acre parcel. For those who may not be familiar about the location of this site, it's identified now on the screen. Again, approximately, let's call it 52 acres located here. The high school properties to the north across Highway 19, cemetery located to the west, and these are the current city limit lines on the east side of the city of Cannon Falls. As I indicated in my staff report, the 2003 comprehensive plan identifies this as a high priority for residential development in the community. Also identifies it as an area acceptable for low-density residential development. So from the comprehensive plan's perspective, we're good to go in terms of the request for rezoning, in this instance to an R2 district. I noted, just as an aside to the Planning Commission, it's more important to you than maybe the public, but you all know we've been trying to get through the new ordinance. I'm still working on it from time to time. But our current R2 zoning ordinance, the proposed lot sizes wouldn't all necessarily line up with that, but the proposed R2 zoning district, they would. The new ordinance has not been adopted yet, but if the Planning Commission wishes to go ahead under the current R2 zoning district, we would simply make a recommendation on the plat for a variance for the lots that don't meet it. So under the proposed R2 district, they're good to go. Under the current R2 district, primarily the 65-foot lots would be undersized in terms of what the ordinance is currently stating. But we would, again, be able to handle that through a variance proceeding. I'm not going to be able to get all of this, I don't think. No, not quite. This is the proposed plat, preliminary plat for the entire property. It's identified at this point in two phases. One identified in the yellow area here are the 6 lots that last year were serviced as a result of the city extending utilities north of Highway 19 south to basically serve this residential subdivision. The utilities were extended, the services were installed to provide 6 single-family lots in this particular location. Those lots to be developed need to be rezoned to the R2 and also to be platted through the process. So phase 1 is identified in the overall plat are those 6 lots that were serviced by utilities last year. The balance of the plat then is still subject to further review. I think it's subject to our review as a planning commission and city, as well as Goodhue County along the east side that is dealing with the future plans for the extension of County Boulevard 24 from basically the new interchange in the southeast side of town up to County 25, and then from County 25 up to this location here. And we've looked at that plan in the past. I think you're all familiar with that. Goodhue County is in the process of meeting with Mr. Mulvihill to talk about the right-of-way that they will need in order to facilitate the future construction of that County 24 Boulevard extension along the east side of the plat. So we're waiting a little bit for Goodhue County on this. We're also waiting for comments back from the Highway Department. I met with them probably a month or two ago to talk about this project and have asked them to review the proposed access changes onto Highway 19 for this project. And basically the main one is that the existing 72nd Avenue Way here would be used temporarily as the access to serve these 6 lots, but in the future that would be closed as an access onto Highway 19 and a new permanent access would be constructed somewhat east of that. But at this point, with regards to access and also some pedestrian conversations that we've had with MnDOT, we're still awaiting comments back from them. You got a report from the city engineer in your packet who has reviewed the sanitary sewer water storm drainage facilities, and I'm confident based on Greg Anderson's reviews that we'll be able to work through with the developer the utilities primarily for phase 2. So as I said earlier, phase 1 has already been installed, so it's primarily phase 2. I also identified in the staff report just some of the questions that I had relative to the plat. The majority of the plat requirements have been accommodated by Corey Meyer, the consultant for Glenn Mulvihill on this. We have a plat name, we've got some street names, we've got some other things we need to work through here. But for the most part, the plat complies with the requirements of the ordinance. The other questions that I had that, again, I don't think we need to resolve tonight, but we've talked about before is one is sidewalks and pedestrian movements through this subdivision and also the connection to the high school. We talked about that when Glenn was first here with the concept plan. I've since met with the school. I've met with MnDOT. I think we'll have to have some more conversation. If we're going to have sidewalks and pedestrian ways through this development, I think we want to work with Glenn and his designers to figure out where are they best located, where are they best suited. The ordinance requires sidewalks, 5-foot sidewalks, to be constructed on one side of all local streets in this subdivision. The developer has identified locations for sidewalks, and I think we're going to want to talk with him more about that issue. I also raised some questions about extending future connectivity to the south. Right now, it's predominantly located on the far east end of the project. I think once we get a final word back from Goodhue County in terms of the right-of-way that they need for County 24, we can relook at it at that point. But it seems to me that having a connection to the Mills property to the south, coming back further to the west, might make some more sense and at least worth some of our evaluation. Also, on the pedestrian side of it, whether or not we feel that we're best suited for getting pedestrians down to the 19 right-of-way, or perhaps somewhere over here along Street 2. I assume that's not the name. Street 2, that perhaps we could have some consideration for some type of pedestrian movement back over to the west and then back into 71st as well. But again, I think those discussions can wait to a later day if you prefer that. So I think in closing, before I turn it over to Glenn or Corey, I'll just reiterate again that I think they've done a really good job in terms of meeting the requirements of the plat. For the most part, we're almost there. I think there are some planning issues that we should probably think about as we move forward. But in terms of the R2 zoning, I have no issue with that. I really have no issue with regards to those first 6 lots in the first plat. Corey and Glenn mentioned to me tonight that the Phase 2 will not be the remainder of the property. There will be something less than the 117, 18 lots, whatever it is, that would be platted in the second phase. So it wouldn't be the entire development as proposed for Phase 2. So we need to kind of understand that. But to get to that point, I'm recommending tonight, following the hearing, unless there's particular objections or concerns yet raised, that we consider recommending a total rezoning of the entire 51.5 acres to an R2, and that we recommend approval of the preliminary plat for just those 6 lots, and then we recess the public hearing, tonight's public hearing, probably to our meeting in April, pending further information from Goodhue County, the Highway Department, our ability to deal a little bit more with the developer and Glenn between now and then in terms of some of these other questions that I've raised in my memo. So I think that would be a direction we should probably pursue. At that point, if any questions of me at this point, or would you like me to turn it over to Corey and or Glenn? And I can certainly come back.
Anyone have any questions for Dave?
Okay. Do you want to use that or something?
Yeah, if that would
Okay,
work.
that's fine. Yep.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Corey Meyer. I'm with Westwood Professional Services. We're a land and energy development consultant out of Eden Prairie. We actually have a lot of history going back on this project. You may or may not be aware of, but back in, I think, 2006, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but we brought forward this a development proposal for this project known as Tanner's Grove. That was a different project developer. The recession hit, and Glenn was able to buy this property, and so he has continued to bring Westwood on as a development consultant. I think Dave did a really good job kind of touching on the issues. I think most of the comments, nearly all of the comments in the engineer's letter and the staff report will be able to be addressed as we move forward to the next stage for final plans. Glenn has a desire to get these 6 lots on the market as soon as possible, and so we will be bringing forward, after assuming that we would get City Council approval of the preliminary plat, we will then be bringing forward the final plat for these 6 lots and construction documents for those as well. So like I said, everything in there we're comfortable with. the street names we'll work through with the city and or the county to get those resolved. Pedestrian connections, we are certainly open to looking at whatever the city's needs are, location, connectivity points, etc. We are also, like Dave mentioned, we are working with the county to make sure their needs for hardwood are addressed. We're comfortable at this point, based on the current plans that they shared with Glenn, that there's minor revisions that would be needed to the plat to accommodate their right-of-way request. Beyond that, I guess if you have any questions of me, I'll be certainly able to try to answer those for you. The only other thing that we would like a little bit of a guidance on would be 72nd Way and how that particularly is going to get addressed, whether that our proposal right now indicates that staying as a gravel road, and we would treat that as a rural section road, much like it exists today, with grading a swale and a ditch to handle our stormwater. So I think the engineer's report mentioned there might be some ideal to get that brought up to a paved section and or a urban section with curb and gutter. So we would like kind of that resolved sooner than later, I guess. So if we could get some direction from the city, that would be fantastic. I think from Glenn's perspective, there's a bigger benefit to the neighborhood than necessarily just our project, and so I think that's what he's looking for, some fair resolution on that if it is going to be a full city street section. One last point I'll touch on is the street width. We're aware of the city standard of 32, and if that is a strong that is the limit, then we're fine. We'll make that adjustment. I think part of our application is trying to reduce the amount of infrastructure, reduce the amount of impervious surfacing, the amount of snow you got to remove. So 28 still, in our experience, we've done a lot of projects closer to the metro, but 28 still allows you to park on one side. It's kind of a good balance, and still accommodates all the needs for public infrastructure without kind of going overboard and really creating a lot of extra pavement. So that was just the thought behind that. Like I said, city standards are city standards, so we'll be more than willing to meet whatever requirements you would like us to meet. So that's really all I had for now. Any questions for me? Thank you for your time.
I have one.
Oh, yes.
Lot sizes
Yes.
on the first 6,
Yep.
approximately frontage and depth.
75 foot wide on the first 6. Depth are normally they're around 140. Yes, these first 6 are all 75 by 140.
It looks like the second phase there, the rest of them you got maybe a little bit
Yeah,
narrower. Or
there.
you
Yes,
plan on-
there are some portions of the next phase that would be 65 foot wide, and those generally fall kind of around the outside. So what we're trying to hit is a little bit different target market. While the 75s might be a 3-car garage, there might be the buyer out there that doesn't necessarily need a 3-car garage, might be a 2-car garage, and that fits more than adequate on a 65 foot wide lot. So those are generally kind of around the outside and on probably one side of this block and the south side of this block. So, and that there's a certain amount, since we're not really kind of asking for approvals on the next part yet, I guess we'd be willing to seek some input on that.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Any other members have any questions or comments?
Thank you.
Yep. How about any of the people that are here? Is there anybody here that has a question or a comment?
I got one question for Dave.
You got a question for Dave?
Yep.
All right.
How hard-nosed are city staff on the 32 feet, I guess? It wouldn't hurt my feelings to see less pavement over there and only allow parking on one side, if any parking, keep the cars up in the yards, but it's personal preference. Especially if I know we're gonna make them put sidewalks in someplace, and I'd like to see no sidewalks.
Yeah, a couple of things, David. One is I think we really need to know from Goodhue County and MnDOT their positions relative to the edges of this site. Depending on what MnDOT does or doesn't do on 19 is going to affect access into the site, which could affect the question of pedestrian ways and potentially street widths. Depending on what Goodhue County does on the east side, depending on how much right-of-way they need, could shift a fair amount of this plat one way or the other. So I think when we know from those two entities kind of where they're at with their respective issues, that might help us then go back and look at 28-foot streets in maybe the entire development, maybe parts of the development. I think that's going to depend a little bit on what we're left with from MnDOT and Goodhue County at this point. But it will be a change of policy. It's something that we haven't done. Now, we haven't had, this is really the first residential plat since I've come to the community. The ones that were done previously are kind of redo stage at this point.
Right.
So
But this plat has buildable lots in it where the other ones don't.
I agree.
I don't think we have a plat in town that's got any buildable lots left on it.
I don't disagree with that. And like I say, I think with this particular plat, we wanted to be sensitive to Glenn's request from a timing perspective and expedite at least the review on the first 6 lots, but give us a little bit of time to really go through and evaluate these alternatives with Corey and Glenn and the city engineer and see if we can come up with some reasonable compromises here and there on street widths, sidewalk, pedestrian rights-of-way, parks. We didn't talk about that, but there's some questions there. So I think we've got a few policy-related issues to go through.
So staff is willing to be cooperative then?
We always are cooperative.
Okay.
I've got a question on, I sent you an email.
Yep.
I was curious about the radius of snowplows being able to turn around in those cul-de-sacs. I lived in a small cul-de-sac in Rochester that they actually had to make a neighborhood organization to pay for private plowing because the plows couldn't turn around in the cul-de-sacs.
We're planning on the cul-de-sacs, the 2 cul-de-sacs on the west end. Those are fine. The one question we've got is the one over in the northeast
Yeah,
corner.
Street 4. Yeah.
That we're going to want to have some conversation with them about, but the other 2 are fine.
Okay.
So I think, again, for tonight, if we pare it down to the R2 zoning, the land use for the overall development, if you're generally okay with that,
What's our setbacks on the R2, on the side setbacks? Is that 5 and 5?
they're going 7.5
7.5.
foot on each on theirs. Our new ordinance is going to bring it down to 5. Our current ordinance is going to be 10. So they split the difference, I guess. So and again, and if we end up with the smaller lots, the 75-foot lots, whether it's 5 or 10 or 7.5 isn't that critical. The 65-foot lots become a little bit more of an issue relative to the side yard. And these, I think,
Well,
you've still got them at 7.
you're limited to what house you can put in there, what size your box is.
So we're down to 50-foot buildable, at least on the smaller lots, which is still fine, but it's going to,
A lot of splits.
yeah. So the commission's okay with the R2, the low-density, single-family residential development, which this is all that's proposed right now. That's one question to you. And then the second one, it's really on the platting side. It's really those 6 lots on 72nd that I would recommend are at issue at this point, and maybe are things that We saw them before. The council approved the extension of utilities there. It seems reasonable to have those 6 lots there. If you're in agreement, the resolution is written in the way that we would recommend rezoning for everything to R2 at this point, but approving the plat for only the first 6 lots. Give us another 30 days at least to gather more information with Goodhue County and the state of Minnesota, and then we'll work more closely with those 2 guys on the sidewalks, the parks, the street widths, and that type of thing. So we would expect to come back to a recessed public hearing at least at the meeting in April.
I guess I'm in favor of pretty much everything the way it's laid out. I think the sooner we can get them on the market and get them up and running over there, the better off for everybody involved.
So do we need a motion to recess then?
If you approve resolution 2014-2, that will recess the hearing and approve the R2 zoning and recommend approval of the plat for the 6 lots.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
A second.
We got a motion by Mr. Price and a second by Ms. Charnell. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the 3rd public hearing, which is rezoning Water Street, the west parcels.
Maybe need some help with maybe these lights. Thanks, guys. Public hearing tonight is on a request by Steve Auger, Rob, and Mike Lawrence to rezone what we've referred to as the former creamery property from its current zoning of R3 to a limited industrial zoning district. As we always do with public hearings, we've published notice of this hearing in the Cannon Falls Beacon. We've also sent out mailed notice to everyone within 350 feet. I'm going to pass out to each one of the commission members. I did receive a letter from Mark Stedman, signed by several others, with questions about the rezoning, their neighbors to the former creamery site. I've also provided a copy of this letter to the applicants, but I'll hand that out now. And as you're looking at the letter, I'll just mention that it's really in the form of questions and I guess maybe suggestions to the Planning Commission for the things that you ought to consider if we're going to go ahead with a change of zoning, and in this particular case from the R3 to the limited industrial. Things that we had talked about at the last meeting when they came and gave us a concept review of what the proposal is. Well, the Planning Commission is looking at the letter for the general public. This is about a 1-acre parcel of land located adjacent to 3rd Street North and Water Street. As I mentioned earlier, it's known as the former creamery site. There's a vacant former residential structure to the west of the main building, and about the 14,000 square foot or so building to the east is the location that the applicant has proposed to operate some limited industrial uses. When they were here at the last meeting and after, I talked with them again to see whether or not there was evidence of an industrial use being operating in that location within the last year. And it's not totally clear if there was or it wasn't. If it had been true or could be concluded that it's to be true that an industrial use was operating within that building over the last year, they would have been able to continue their legal nonconforming status as an industrial use in an R3 district. And it's not clear to me at this point for sure whether or not there was or was not an operation of industrial use at that time. So that left them with the decision to make of requesting the rezoning. I've talked with them about their plans. You heard about their plans at the last meeting that they attended, and it seemed to me that the most appropriate zoning classification that we could look to if we're going to rezone this property is the I-1 limited industrial district. So that again is what's being requested tonight, that that acre or so land be rezoned from R3 to the industrial use. Also included with the packet to the commissioners was the biographies of the ownership group that's proposing to buy this property, as well as a written description of the intended use of the building, and again reiterating what was explained to you at the last meeting in terms of what their vision in terms of use of the property would be. I would say that with regards to the Stedman letter and what we talked about with them at the last meeting and what the commission sees in all projects of this type where we're changing land use, I think the important thing to remember is once we rezone a property, in this case from R3 to limited industrial, as long as the uses are permitted by the ordinance, as long as the operation isn't creating nuisances or unnecessary impacts to the surrounding neighborhood, they can continue to operate as they wish to. At such time as we maybe have a complaint or concern for noise, for truck traffic, for access, for unsightly conditions, garbage, whatever the case may be, we're left in that situation, A, to contact the owner or the management company and ask them to kindly address that. And if they do, problem solved. If they don't, then we're left as a city to enforce it as a violation, potentially a nuisance violation under our ordinance. So I've asked Steve and Rob and Mike to not only understand that, but to be willing to accept that responsibility, because if we do rezone this, as long as they're the owners and the operators of that building, it's fair to the neighbors to understand who they need to contact in the event of concern if it's not me. If they do contact me, I'll be in contact with the owners and we'll try to deal with it in that fashion. I'm comfortable that if it happens in this instance, we'll be fine. If the property's sold and it is rezoned, we're going to have to rely on the next owner to also comply with those kind of considerations. So it's not an absolute assurance of compliance, but I think with respect to the applicants and what they're proposing to do here, I feel comfortable that we can cooperate with them in the event that there is a concern from the neighborhood. But with any rezoning, once it's done, it's done. The city could also, in the future, if there are problems, rezone it like we did Sandstone Ridge. We always have that right, but our preference is always to kind of get the cooperation and from the owners and assure us that they understand the responsibilities. And I think they've laid that out to you. So again, tonight it's a public hearing with respect to rezoning this property from R3 to a limited industrial district. If there's any questions from the commissioners, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Steve and Rob are here tonight as well if you've got questions for them.
Hey, Steve, or Dave, you've actually probably know the answer to this. This thing says there's a sewer pipe that exits the building. Is that a sewer pipe or is that a wastewater?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. I know that the applicants have indicated that they're going to have the property surveyed. I don't know if it's been surveyed yet. Okay. They brought it to our attention in the past, and we're not entirely sure exactly what that circumstance is. I don't disagree with the Stedmans that if that is a concern, we ought to try to resolve that with the applicants in this process. But if the survey isn't done yet, I think I'd like to see that first and then try to address it from there. Right. Anything more? Have you guys discovered anything more in your, yeah.
No, that was, the letter was the first we knew that there was a secondary sewer.
Okay.
Right, we feel that would be able to get a lot of information from the Stedmans on.
They redid Water Street and everything, didn't they put new sewer and water in?
Yes, in water they did, yeah.
No sewer?
No, water and sewer, but I'm not sure what this particular sewer matter relates to. That I don't know the answer to that question.
So it could be storm drain.
Could be an old cistern out back too.
Yeah,
I mean, for as long as that thing's been sitting there.
Yeah. In the event that it does go ahead, rezoned or not, anyone who buys that property is going to want to have the disclosure on that and get it addressed. So I don't disagree with the Stedmans on this. I mean, it's a question in our minds too. And
Is the rezoning dependent on the survey, or does the survey just come along with everything later on?
if you want to make a recommendation to be subject to the survey, I have no problem with that. I've asked for it. They've told me that it's going to be done. We should have it anyway. They should have it as buyers. So I'm reasonably confident that we're going to get it, even if we don't ask for it, because they're going to want it to purchase the property.
Would we ever find out what the alley going by? We don't have
Same.
survey, so-
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah.
We were hoping to have that done this time, but it just didn't get done in time.
In the event that you go ahead,
Likely we can work through a couple little things.
yeah, I think we can. I think if you feel strongly about the survey, what we can do here is, if you're okay with the request for the rezoning, you can make that recommendation under that resolution. The council's going to need 2 readings by ordinance to rezone it. We can take it to the first reading, have them do that with your recommendation, and withhold the second reading until such time as we get the survey and are able to assess really what the sewer issue is and any other questions on the alley, et cetera.
I don't feel that we need to hold it up. I'd like to make sure, a couple little things here, we make sure it's according to oil.
Right.
We've been error-free for a while, there's no point in starting this right now.
Anything else one of you two guys would like to add, or?
I don't know if any of the public's here to see me, but I did bring some information. I'll be a tenant on site, owner tenant, willing and ready to address any of the neighbors' issues right away. Being that we're there, or I'm there all the time, it should be pretty easy to get a hold of me. Any
Well,
questions for me?
We talked about it last time, and the first thing that they have on their thing says something about buildings not getting any bigger. It's my understanding that you don't really intend to enlarge any of the buildings, but maybe, I don't know, put a new roof on it. And
Right. We'd want to replace the flat roof on the back on the tallest part, needs immediate replacement. And the intention is that it stays a flat roof, banning any unknown, unforeseeable incidents, as I guess. But it's just pretty much straight flat roof repair.
Oh, the
No.
whole house is going, isn't it?
Pardon?
The house on the corners, that's leaving once you,
That is our intention at this time. That's, we do believe it is beyond repair. So that is our intention. Of course, we want to clean up on the other side of the property, the pile of bricks, all the shrub, brush, things like that. And whatever we end up with for the alley will be all part of that too, once we see that survey and find out where it really is.
Let me comment on the expansion, because I think that is an important point to the Stedmans, obviously, in their letter. The R3 zoning now would allow, if there were no buildings there, would allow a 35-foot height building. The industrial district allows a 45-foot high building. So that's the difference between the two districts, the R3 at 35 and the industrial at 45. In this case, when we see the survey, we're going to see where that existing building is located. Probably not going to be able to add a story on top of that building, but even if they were going to expand the building, let's say the house was removed and they wanted to put an addition on that existing building to the west, they could do that provided that they met all of the requirements under the industrial zoning district relative to setbacks, etc. That's assuming it's not a non-conforming structure. I'm guessing maybe it is a non-conforming structure. So if they wanted to expand that building, it's not as simple as just coming in and getting a building permit to expand that. We're going to have to deal with what I'm guessing is probably a non-conforming building because of setback to the north. So I'm not overly concerned about the height issue raised by the Stedmans, the difference between the R3 as it exists today or the industrial zoning and their ability to build. If there weren't any buildings there, a 35-foot high multifamily building with a 20 or maybe 25-foot setback off of that north property line, being able to cover that entire east-west part of that lot may in fact create more of an obstruction than a 45-foot high building. So I think it's a fair question, but once we get the survey, I think I'll be in a better position to tell these guys, okay, if the zoning goes ahead, here's what you got to do. And with respect to that existing building, if you ever want to expand it, here's what you're going to have to do in order to do that. So I think if the zoning goes through, they're going to get what they get, which is a 14,000-foot existing building, and they can remodel it, they can repair it, they can maintain it, they can do everything they want on the interior walls. But in terms of raising the height or raising the width of that building, it would surprise me if it's not a non-conforming building in its current location.
It's awful close to 45 feet on the backside anyway.
Yeah, on the backside.
Oh, I would think.
Depending on where,
Where do you drop
where
the?
you take the measurement from.
Yeah, you could get down the pit and get another 3-4 feet. Yes, and we understand as we purchase the building with the different setbacks, the building pretty much is what it is. You know, there's not a lot of room for it to go. You never want to say never. As I turned 50 and have kids, I really learned that. But that's not our intentions at all. Can't imagine putting up another one there. But the one that's there is great for this type of use. Would any of you like cards you can get a hold of me? I'll pass them out.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anybody in the public want?
Was anybody here, did anybody else here have anything to say in regards to the Water Street West parcels?
Good evening. I'm Joe Wheeler. I'm with the Southeast Minnesota Housing Redevelopment Authority. We have quite a bit at stake here. We own Trailside directly across from this property. We also own Whispering Woods. We were involved in kind of cleaning up that site and putting multifamily development, both family and elderly, in that facility based on that R3 is one of the things we look at, obviously. So if we're looking to go to industrial, that's an issue to us. And I'm kind of in the dark at this point because I have no indication what's been happening there in the past. I can tell you I haven't had any complaints from any of our residents at this point, and then what it's going to go to, what it's going to become, because we're going to have concerns, obviously, with noise and dust and truck traffic and those kinds of things, because we have kids and those types of things living in the property adjacent right across the street from it. So with that, I guess I wanted to come in front of the commission because I just recently got information on what an industrial is, light industrial is, and I have not had an opportunity to contact our residents directly about this proposed zoning change, and I'd like to be able to do that for our residents both at Trailside and Whispering Woods. We have millions invested in those properties across the street, so you can understand our concern, and still paying on the bonds. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, that will conclude the public hearing for the Water Street West parcels. That brings us to Resolution 2014-3, rezoning Water Street West parcels. Do I have a motion?
So we're pretty well covered if we go ahead and approve this, if we were to go on to let it keep going, because we still got 2 more readings on it, so we got another 45 days plus.
Yeah, what I would suggest is I think we should have the survey. And I think with regards to Joe Wheeler's comments and the townhouses adjacent, he's mentioned to me tonight too that he wants to contact the tenants. I think what we do is if you're going to go ahead with this, we'll submit to the council the first reading of the ordinance as soon as next Tuesday, and then give the next 2 weeks to receive a survey and any comments back from Mr. Wheeler. If they're not forthcoming by that time, we can delay the second reading until that happens, if that's your direction.
Okay. Well, that sounds fair enough to me, I guess. I don't.
Is that a motion?
Well, I'm not looking to put the brakes on the whole thing, but I still want to make sure that we as a city are covered, and if we do have a few people that have other issues, I guess we have the council meeting that can be addressed at.
Yeah,
Also, what's that, next week or the week after?
the 18th and then April 1st, right? April 1st, first Tuesday, I think.
Because this was in the paper, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So I would think that if some of the tenants up there possibly get the paper, I would hope. I would think if nothing else, it's going to kind of clean up a rat trap.
I think with respect to this application, it's not dissimilar from some others that we've had in the past that have asked for conditional use permits, rezonings, interim use permits. And I think our philosophy has been, to the extent that we can keep peace in the neighborhoods, we're willing to go ahead with these requests like this, be it rezoning, special zoning permits, whatever, in terms of the opportunity to redevelop and improve existing properties. Because our choice is, from a land use perspective, if we don't like, in this case, industrial use, we can certainly recommend to deny it. The council, if they choose to accept that recommendation, can deny the rezoning, and this project will go away, and the empty house and the empty building will stay. We've had conversations.
Well, I don't want it to stay empty, I guess.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And I don't think the usage is that far out of line with what was there a year and a half ago, really.
The choice has become balancing the land use protections and the economic realities of life. And I've got Bill Duncan here, who sits on the EDA. We've seen a lot of these too, where we just don't have the financial wherewithal to go in and purchase properties that we would prefer to redevelop entirely when they become available, rather than have the private sector do that. And sometimes our trade-off has been the special permits to allow the private sector to do this, rather than force us to say, oh, we don't like that, so we're going to go buy it and we're going to clean it off and we're going to hope for the best. We haven't had the resources to do that. So we've made kind of that policy adjustment before, even with this commission and other properties, and I think that's reasonable if we're comfortable in this case that the owners will do what the owners say they're going to do, and that we can with a survey and related protections, we can get an outcome here that still keeps peace in the neighborhood. Given an existing building
I
that's
think
been
it's a big
industrial
plus
for years.
having tenant ownership occupied. I don't see where we can have a whole lot of problems there. Because then it comes back to us, and then we're up there right away after him, so.
Has there been complaints there before, or for any?
I haven't had a complaint since I've been here on the operation. And again,
There for a while, there was somebody out after it, maybe that was 2004 or 5, but all the cats tearing around up there.
we're going to have
I
an
think
issue at the
somebody
next
was-
public hearing that's not dissimilar to this, where we have a piece of property that's become vacant for more than a year. It's lost its legal non-conforming status, and now we have to deal with those things. And it's not always easy to come to solutions that everybody can live with.
And I'm not a fan of the city being in the real estate market. So I just soon have the private sector taking care of it.
You think it'd be more expensive then?
There's no thinking about it.
Well,
So
I
guess
sure don't think there's much other types of use for that kind of building that are gonna probably fit in there without a lot of retrofitting, a lot of financial input. I don't.
yeah, you got to go around and try to scare up the money to tear everything down and start over again. And then the neighbors to the north, if you put a row building or townhouses or something in there, they're going to be blocked out of the south because they're going to run it from corner to corner. And we got one more issue on our hands, even for the R3. If somebody was to buy it and come, like in the city's behalf, I think we're much better off if somebody's going to come in, get rid of the old house, clean up the building, put a new facade on the front, get it looking good and use it. I think it's worth a chance, personally myself.
Well, and I-1 was what seemed to fit best, didn't it? With what?
I think it gives, it certainly responds to what Steve's business needs. I think it creates some other opportunities to have non-intrusive industrial uses in that building that would be compatible with his. The retail options, and we've talked about that, the retail options, for the most part, if they're not incidental, if Steve had a 200 square foot, hypothetically, a 200 square foot area in his business where I could walk in and buy some of the products that he produces off retail, he can do that. But you wouldn't be able to put a full-scale principal retail operation in that building right now under this zoning without either a conditional use permit or worse, maybe some type of rezoning. So the retail ability now is pretty limited as a permitted use, incidental to the main operation, the industrial use, that's okay, and I can approve that administratively. But beyond that, they're probably going to have to come back either as a conditional use permit or, depending on what it is, maybe some type of rezoning to get beyond this limited industrial use that the ordinance allows.
I think if we had too much of any kind of retail in there, then that's where we're going to get into the problems with the neighbors and the traffic and truck traffic and the in and out and everything else. In the industrial, I think give us a little bit better handle on keeping control of it anyway. Not that we want to control it, but we want to eliminate the phone calls, I guess.
Right.
So what's it take a motion then to get it rolling?
Resolution 3.
I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 3 along with, how do you word that, for holding up the second reading until we get what we asked for? The survey.
Just like that.
The survey and
Survey, and Joe, do you think
Find
a
out.
couple weeks?
yep,
Okay.
give them enough time
So
to
before
get a letter out to the residents.
Before it goes to the second reading, if it passes the first reading, if it
Yep.
passes here and passes the first reading, before it goes to the second reading, we need to have a survey, work out any issues, understand between us what the survey is really showing us, and have Joe get back from the tenant. before it goes to second reading.
And we've done that before on a couple of occasions.
And we got 2 council members here too that will remind me if I forget.
I'll second this motion.
I've got a motion by Mr. Price and a second by Mr. Longton. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the last public hearing, which is the conditional use permit, 1201 5th Street North.
I don't either.
You're really good at that. I'm going to invite you back. Fortunately, these black and white, I should be doing these in color, I think. There we go. Public hearing tonight on a conditional use permit application submitted by Farmers Co-op Ag Partners, who owns the building at 1201. That's a 1900s vintage vacant 2-story residential structure. And just like the project that we just talked about, it enjoyed legal nonconforming status when it was occupied for single-family purposes after 2006, but has been vacant for more than a year. So we're left in a situation here where, again, I can't hang my hat on legal nonconforming status, can't allow the property to be sold as is and reoccupied for single-family purposes, other than under our residential business district, other than issuing a conditional use permit. So Ag Partners would like to sell that property to buyers who wish to reoccupy the structure for single-family purposes. I've asked the applicant and communicated with Ag Partners that under our conditional use permit process, there's some questions here that the commission has to look at under the ordinance, that I have to look at under the ordinance, that we have to comfortably convince the council that whatever recommendation comes from this group, they should adopt because it reflects the ordinance. And to do that, I've been a little concerned because we don't have a survey. I don't know exactly where the legal access to this property is. I don't know exactly where the boundary is between the existing convenience store and the single-family home. We've had a previous owner of the property to the south, Glenn Mulvihill, owns this now, but he didn't own it at the time. We had that apartment complex that came in. We had some drainage and access questions presented to us by the highway department. We've got Canon equipment that is in the back side of this particular property. You know, there's a lot of things going on around this single-family home. And again, as a legal nonconforming, when it had that status, it didn't matter what the zoning ordinance said as long as they could occupy that as a residence. Well, now that they can't because they've lost it, we're forced into the conditional use permit procedures, and we got to figure out, if we want to approve this, how we do that. And so I've recommended to the commission that, again, just like the prior hearing, if we had a survey which would show property lines, where this house sits on that property, where the access point to the property is, its relationship, particularly the convenience store. It's kind of one of those reversal of situations. We talked previously when we issued the permit for Casey's. We had residents and businesses around that raised all sorts of concerns about lighting and signage and drainage and this and that, all legitimate concerns. I think under our conditional use process, the concern that the ordinance would suggest we ought to look at is if the permit is issued and there are traffic, lighting, garbage, screening issues between this residence and the convenience store to the north, we're going to have to deal with them. And I guess if we're going to have to deal with them, I'd like to know what we're dealing with before we have to deal with them. So I've recommended that we have a survey here. But again, the residential business district allows single-family homes, somewhat ironically, by conditional use permit unless they're legal nonconforming. We'll fix that when I finally get around to getting rid of this zoning district, but we're not there yet, so I've got to deal with it. So Tonight, again, the public hearing is should this or should this not be issued a conditional use permit, which would allow, if it is issued by the city council, ultimately would allow that property to be sold for single-family use. It could be occupied again for that use. And I guess if we're going to do that, it would be helpful, I think, under our ordinance to have a survey so we have a chance to look at that and see if there are any particular problems with the existing layout of the property, and if there are some things that maybe should be recommended to better protect the interests of the residents in a highly commercial industrial zone, that we have an opportunity to do that before the property's sold. So my recommendation tonight, again, is with Resolution 4, is we need to hold a public hearing. I know there's some folks here that might have something to say tonight, but if we are going to go ahead, I guess I think we should, under the ordinance, require a survey and have a chance to look at that and see if there are things from a land use perspective that we might be interested in requiring here before the property is actually sold. So that's the report. And again, any questions of the commissioners to me at this point? David?
If we switch that back, now that the mini mart's back up and we got Cenex on the other side, wouldn't the buyer as is kind of the prevalent rule then?
Yeah, and those
there
that
wouldn't
bought,
be any complaints coming in, but what you see is what you get type deal?
I would hope that to be true, but that's not always true.
You need me to specify that?
I didn't know airplanes would land at the airport that I bought next to, one of those deals. Yeah, no, and that's why it's been difficult even for me at this point. But again, the residential business district is far from perfect. It's forced the applicant and us into this situation under the conditional use permit. And if there's things that we think are important, this is the time to deal with them. Otherwise, it's buyer beware.
Railroad tracks not even a block away, and there's a whole slew of townhouses in Rosemont that are within 150 feet of the railroad tracks, and every week in the paper they're complaining that railroad track's been there for a long time.
I agree. Yeah, and again, I think it's if there's some issues here between the convenience store and this property, it's the same owner of both right now.
What's our zoning on the other, what is there, 2 single family or 3? That little blue one that's next to the track?
That's all residential business too, yeah.
You didn't move fast enough.
He didn't move fast enough. Our lives would be easier if there would have been an occupant.
I stopped there on the way home tonight, and I can't see for sure how they're getting into that. And I've been by there a million times.
The 50-degree weather has helped some. It's brought the snow down, and I've talked to Jerry's here tonight too, as the realtor, and I mean, sometimes we have to be careful what we wish for too with these surveys. I understand that. But again, the ordinance says very clearly if we're going to issue a permit, we've got to know access. We've got to know where everything sits on the property. We've got to know kind of who's doing what to who in the neighborhood. If we've got drainage coming off of the convenience store into this property, that we need to know that, and that needs to be corrected if we're going to issue a permit. I think in terms of a service under the ordinance to the buyer of the property. I don't know if there is or there isn't, but a survey will tell us if there is.
I think there the house sits fairly high. It's the next 2 lots off to the south
that are low.
Yeah.
And there's a drainage ditch that comes through there too that we found out on that apartment project.
Right.
Yeah, through the back of it, right?
Yeah.
Does that run all the way back to the 4th Street, or just part way like what the black line's showing?
No, that's parking lot.
Yeah,
That's parking lot.
Ken
back
Equipment's parking lot.
Yeah, see where all that spaces, you can almost see the parking spaces.
Yeah.
If you look real close. So that's all impervious surface and it drains down that way.
Yeah, there's something to be said for consistency, and again, my recommendation, it's only a recommendation, is to have the survey here so we know what we're getting into. If you're more of Dave's mind and we don't have the survey, I'm not going to lose sleep over it, but we got to remember that as long as we have this residential business district and or some of our other zoning districts, periodically we get into situations like this, and we've consistently required surveys when we run into these kind of questions. So it's added expense, it's added time, but it's information we don't have.
To the potential buyer that to at least have the survey, so that we know what we're talking about, I guess.
Yeah.
It's sat there empty for quite a while.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
It is going to be residential use then.
Correct. Yep.
We do have a buyer for it right now.
The sign says sold, I noticed.
It is sold subject to this,
What we do.
we do have the survey for the sending station, the two points on the north end, but we don't have the two on the other. On the far side of it, the vacated St. Clair Street.
Well, we probably got them.
Right.
Because when he came in with the townhouse stuff, we probably have this
Both sides,
both sides.
Yeah.
not the middle.
Right.
If it stays commercial, I don't know what, like partners would do with it, because what do you do with a 4 or 5 bedroom house? And the house is pretty good shape. It's got, newer windows, siding, roof is good. Just needs some cosmetic work inside, and it'll be back in,
Do you know what the access is, Jerry?
the access.
It's a dirt driveway, isn't it?
Gravel to the highway.
Comes out by ag there, or where?
To 19.
Is it?
Yeah.
I think it's been there for
That's been
15 years.
yeah, forever.
And there before we were,
Yeah.
right?
We assume it's on the lot being sold.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think there's any question that if the survey's done, there's going to be cooperation with Ag Partners. I've discussed this with them. They own both properties. If we find something that needs to be corrected, we worked with Ag Partners before on their new building. I'm confident that we'll find a way to solve anything that we might find on the survey if something is shown on the survey. Because it's an event.
You think that might be funny, but I bought a house in town here, and the neighbor's garage was on my lot.
So you got to pay the taxes?
She got madder than heck when I had to go over and tell her. Then I tried to sell her part of my lot. That didn't go over very good either. But I mean, it makes a mess.
We have one of those situations just up the street, and it can be a costly thing to fix. And like I say, that's why in terms of us doing due diligence under the ordinance, we need to know if we're going to issue the permit.
Right.
We don't need to issue the permit.
Would the survey, I think there's possibly a survey at the courthouse. Would that be enough, or do we need to have Rick or somebody go out and get a new current?
I've talked to Jerry. I've talked to Ag Partners. It doesn't seem like there's a record of an existing survey. So I think it's best just to have Rick do it and see what we've got.
And that would waylay the closing on the home.
Right.
And possibly do away with the deal. I don't know.
The survey would?
Well, with
The
all
delay
the
on
snow
the
there,
time.
I've talked to Rick. He's like, how soon would you need it done? Well,
That's his
So be
first
it.
question
So-
always.
yeah, yeah.
But if you look at the Senex survey, you know, if you're worried about encroachments, there's nothing, that would have shown up on the south side of the Senate survey. You know, if there was an encroachment over, if that's what you're worried about, you know, if the buildings are over. But,
I don't know, it's an old home, the guy's willing to fix it up and make it be presentable, and I'm sure he's gonna do a beautiful job with it.
the guy that bought it, it's gonna be a beautiful home when he gets done with it.
I wanna see it when he's done with it. So, I guess that's where it's at. Sometimes I
And-
think we dig too much into stuff, but that's your job.
Egg Park, you guys haven't had that rented out
No,
to anybody even within the last year?
no.
Not even to the mice, you didn't rent it out, or
Well, I
nothing
found
that
one
we
dead
could?
one in the basement, and I, of course, had to be standing on it. Out of 7 of us, it was me.
They've got bait boxes in there, so it's been taken.
No, it
So
looks
it's-
really
it's
nice.
been well over a
You
year
would be
then?
amazed at the inside of that home. I really was.
All your woodwork, it's really a nice home.
So, I just.
Yeah, that's the
kind of
problem with it being over the year. It puts us where our hands are tied without making a lot of other people mad or having to do serious compromise on something else that we just as soon not, I guess. I hate to mess up a person's closing too. I know how that, that's not good.
No.
When's the closing?
April 1.
April 1.
I'm sure it's gonna look a lot nicer. That's kind of where we're at. What we're gonna do with it.
If the planning commission goes ahead with the recommendation, unlike the ordinances that are required for rezoning, like the last issue, this is a resolution to the city council. That can go to them next Tuesday. I don't know what the weather's gonna be between now and April 1st. If the survey requirement is part of the recommendation, hopefully a survey could be done before that. If not, I would hope that the buyer and seller could reach an equitable agreement to extend the closing date if need be.
Well, and I'm just
Possibly if
guessing.
Things look like they're moving along here at City Hall relatively well, and we know that it's just dependent on the survey. The buyer might be a little bit more cooperative, or was he presented with that option?
It's written up as such, but
We'd have to discuss that with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, we don't want to lose them.
Right.
Good buyer.
It's one more resident in town.
Yeah, it's been empty. It's been empty
Just
for the year.
split that water bill up some more, that's what I'm after.
You could eliminate the survey request, but then, of course, you know, as I say, for the buyer, it's gonna be caveat emptor, you know, buyer beware.
Right.
when it is.
Well, he should be going into it with that in mind anyway, I would think.
We're not looking at a $375,000 property right now. He is
Right.
buying it as it is, and that's what it is.
Purchase agreement's written up as is. That gets us off the hook, and it's Jerry's insurance then.
Well, I suppose the other thing to consider is that person selling the adjacent property is the current owner of the neighbor. There's nobody on the other side, so this isn't necessarily something that affects neighbors right there. But that house has been there for a long time. I don't think it's really looked like it should be tore down at any point. I don't think it's in complete disrepair. I didn't see walls falling in or nothing.
The alternative maybe in this case to reach a compromise might be that if you want to do, as Bill pointed out, to remove the survey language from the recommendation, you can do that. But I would do it potentially on the basis that we get some written commitment by the seller, in this case Ag Partners, that in the event there are issues under our conditional use permit that they can correct as the adjoining owner, that they will agree to do that. What I want to be able to do is, if we're not going to require the survey, is differentiate, because I don't want to be here the next one and find that, well, gee, you didn't make them do it. How come? I think we
Well,
need
that's the
something here.
predicament I don't want to be in either.
Yeah. If you're going to waive it and recommend that we waive it, then I think we need to, maybe the next best choice is to have some type of understanding with Ag Partners, the seller, that property is sold and there are some issues that maybe even are discovered later with a survey that they're going to cooperate on addressing them.
Maybe that letter should be signed by both parties.
Yeah, I have no problem with that as long as we differentiate, because I think it is going to be a unique set of circumstances if we have a similar case in the future where you've got the owner, as Dan just said, the owner-seller, buyer-seller relationship as being this tightly knit.
Well, you're giving the responsibility in the last paragraph there for resolving issues, right?
It's just that we're not going to do it with a survey. We'll have some type of other commitment from Ag Partners as the seller.
And as long as they had that letter together at the council meeting, we'd be good to go then, huh? No?
That's something that could be dragged out, you know, with Ag Partners.
Right, I don't wanna hang on to that for, be done.
Well, that's what we're trying to get to, is to let the closing go.
If a survey would resolve the issue, you know, instead of that letter, does that suffice?
I'm just reacting to the concern about time, about Samuelson being able to get out there and survey while we still got the snow. That's why I raised that as an alternative. But if
Well, what did he say to you when he asked? He asked when, and you said,
Yeah, it'd have to be real soon, and he's like, are you kidding me with all the snow? You know, yeah,
So you guys already know where two of the points are he's gonna have to
Correct.
work off of, so he's just gonna have to find the other 2 points.
correct.
we'll have to
That
cite
should
the
be
house
easy
and the driveway and
You gotta mark the 4 house corners, guess on the driveway. Well, I don't know, I guess I'm not opposed to having somebody live in there, and there's not much else you can do with the property. The way it is. I haven't seen anybody else back in on the stuff next door since they were gonna do the church deal or whatever all was that went south.
So, are we thinking of doing that without the survey then?
anybody have any questions, comments?
I think if we can get Rick out there to get the survey done, and it's probably our best bet.
I think that's
Go ahead and
most-
get it moving on to the council, and so it's not holding up anything.
And you get it on to
You can
us,
tell Rick
it
to
takes
call
the-
me with a shovel and
end of the
I'll
month.
come and help.
Because pretty soon it ends up being one more empty place that
Right, yeah.
isn't livable.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as, another year and the roof goes bad and pretty soon it's leaking and then it's starting to implode on itself after that. So. We get it sold and get tax money coming in on it, that's one more water bill.
We get a survey done before the council meeting, would that be suffice to move ahead for closing if there's no issues with the survey?
before April 1st.
Or-
If if they recommend tonight with the survey, that'll go to the council next Tuesday, the 18th. And you'd have between the 18th and April 1st then.
Well, I think I could have the survey before the 18th. I talked to Rick today, and he was on me about not giving him enough business, so.
Just depends on who he's talking to.
I know there's snow, but he makes it work. He has to.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if it can be done the 18th, that'd be great, but even if it isn't, if the council's willing to, if they're willing to recommend and the council's willing to accept the recommendation that the survey be done and any conditions that might be identified resolved, that doesn't necessarily have to be done by the 18th. But as long as it's done before April 1st, which is your closing date, that gives you a little bit more time.
And
That's all I'm saying. We can read the survey to the council, at least the way that the recommendation is written.
that doesn't even necessarily mean that everything has to be fixed by the first either. It's just, no, it would just be prior to the closing that would give the,
Everything's just fine and
Yep.
there's no problems, and then you're off and running.
but if there is something that's, an issue, then that gives you a chance to work with the person buying the property at that point on an agreement, whatever that might be.
I think probably the biggest issue there would be if the house was 1 foot off onto the guy to the south on that property line.
Which that'd be hard to believe if he owns them 2 or 3.
Yeah, and I think when you brought that, when the surveys came in on that townhouse stuff, I'm almost positive that, I mean, there had to be 10 feet, if not more, on the south side of that, I think. I could probably dig back through my old paperwork. But they came in with a survey,
Yeah.
pretty sure.
Yeah, I think
Or was that just a proposed?
Yeah, I don't know if that was a registered property survey or just the GIS, because they only took it to a little bit beyond concept.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they never did identify, in fact, I don't think it was a survey, because I know we heard from MnDOT on that drainage ditch,
Yeah.
and that never got resolved because the church decided not to go ahead. So I don't think they got the registered property survey for us
Okay.
on the apartment. It sounds like that might work then. If you make the recommendation as it's written, it goes to the council on the 18th. If the survey's done, great. If not, it's still done before April 1st. If it doesn't raise any particular concerns, we're good to go. If it raises a concern that Ag Partners as a seller can resolve, we're good to go. If it
It's
raises
zoned R3 right now, right?
residential business.
Residential. RV.
And again, I mean, it's one of the more fascinating things in that district where single-family homes were not included as a permitted use. They're all legal non-conforming.
Didn't we go through and clean up all that, I thought?
I have a,
There's your question.
what is the residential business zone? How does that work? Isn't it either residential or business?
Well, David, maybe you can help out. From just purely reading it, the intent was, I think, two. One, everybody put their hands up in the air and said, we've got so many uses in this big area that we don't know what to do. That's my,
Yeah, and a lot of it was to cover things like that house over there.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
And it
there's
was
lot of
just a
legal
catch-all.
non-conforming
So I
uses.
paid a rezone to have it out of commercial back to residential when I'm actually in a residential commercial? Correct?
residential business.
Run that, you talking specifically about this piece of property
Yes,
to rezone to residential?
residential.
Well, I mean, that, if you wanted just this lot to
Which
forever,
we just.
to forever
we did that.
be single-family residential, that would be one way to do it, to rezone it.
We did rezone that?
No, that would be one way to do it, to rezone it to that. The better solution is someday I finish this residential business district zoning rewrite, we get rid of that whole district and make existing uses conforming.
Yeah.
And then rather than have this large residential business district zone, we maybe take those properties that are truly business now and zone them business if that's what we want, not residential business, and make the residential areas residential. So I think it was a matter of, at the end of the zoning in 2006, and I wasn't here, but just reading into it, I think it was kind of the filler zone that said we got too much stuff going out here. We got railroads, we've got the malting house, we've got convenience stores, we've got a bus garage, we've got townhomes, we've got single-family homes. We have all this stuff. We don't know what to do, so we're going to zone it all residential business. Not that that was necessarily bad, but what it did for the residential, even though the purpose says we want single-family residential, it didn't make them permitted. So that house, if there was still an occupant in it, it could continue to be used for single-family because it went vacant, it lost its non-conforming status, and now we're in kind of this.
So then that's where I had to do the rezoning to get it back to residential.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
So that we've already done.
Well, it's a conditional use permit. If this goes ahead, that would give you the right. You don't have to rezone it when we get to the same end. Yeah. We did the same.
We did do that. The $450 charge to rezone it
The current one?
was my
No.
understanding back to residential, no?
Right now? No. That, if this goes forward, you get the permit to establish the residential use. So we're getting to the same conclusion. We're just not rezoning the property. It'll still be residential business district zone, but you'll have a special permit just on this lot to use it for residential purposes. So we're getting to the same end, but it's a terminology thing. So you're going to get what you're requesting, but we're not rezoning it to R1 single-family zoning. We're giving you a special permit to use it for R1 single-family zoning. It was the only way we could get there. Other than rezoning, but rezoning is going to take a lot longer. It's going to take a higher threshold, and you don't want to do that. This is the easier road. That's why we're on this one. Not the best road, but it's the easiest road.
I suppose that rezoning, then that would postpone the closing then as well.
Yeah, for sure. To rezone, yeah, we would never get there in time. So it's the only way that we could respond to the time frame of the closing. This was the best we can do. And it's not perfect, I admit that, but
I think we're at a point where we could move forward with it. I think I'll present a motion to accept the resolution 2014-4. I mean, they sound like they're going to be going forward with the survey anyway, if they can do it in that time. So we're just making that recommendation.
Second.
I've got a motion by Mr. Longton and a second by Mr. Price. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to number 8, which is Planning Commission member comments.
that'll go to the council next Tuesday. That'll go to the council next Tuesday. If it's not done by next Tuesday, that's okay.
It's got to be done by the 1st.
Before April 1st. Sooner the better.
Will a copy come to you then? Hopefully.
Any other Planning Commission member comments?
No.
That brings us to number 9, which is adjourn.
One additional comment. Ron Johnson is here tonight, the new city administrator.
Oh.
I failed them.
Didn't get a chance to,
Yeah.
didn't get a chance to introduce him before the meeting. I got a little late, but Ron was good enough to come tonight and sit in and become a little bit more familiar with the Planning Commission and 4 issues. So Ron, I don't know if you got anything you want to.
And that was against your better judgment. So.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the Planning Commission tonight?
No, I'm really happy to be in Cannon Falls. My background, without boring you to death, is basically the last little over 9 years in Lake City as administrator, and before that, 15 and a half years in Zimbrota. So those were the good years in Zimbrota with a lot of development going on, 52 expanding, so get to go right back into the fish tank with the 52 stuff, and I'm really looking forward to getting a lot of stuff done and working with different boards and commissions. And I appreciate your work because it's thankless, especially planning commissions. Planning commissions is the most underappreciated job that's not paid.
Dave, how'd you make out with the highway department on the 24 on and offs? Off south and on north, I guess. What was their response without?
The highway department, District 6 highway engineers and Short Elliott Henderson's transportation engineer are meeting Wednesday this week. I hope that they will come to agreement on a scope of services to conduct the additional transportation study with regards to access on the South Corridor and a fee. And if they do, that may go to the council as soon as next Tuesday. It may go back to Public Works Commission and come back to the council maybe April 1st. Kind of depends on what they're able to reach for agreement this Wednesday. And Ron knows this. I've been very happy to bring him in quickly into this project.
But with a little creative thinking, I went out there, and it's doable, relatively easy.
You know, for all of us here, that's probably true. But
I know we're involving the state, and you got a bunch of no minds but it is. There's plenty of length there, and as long as we kept everything on the north side of the culvert going north, and on the south side coming off, we would be fine. That we wouldn't run into any problems there at all on anything.
Well, and again, in fairness to MnDOT, they're going to look at those options purely, not purely, but almost exclusively safety.
Right.
And safety impact.
And we're not asking to put a full interchange in there. It's just making a loop so that the people that are coming north can get off, use the existing businesses that are there, and get back on easily in a normal flow.
And so the issue is going to be, does that particular idea, which isn't crazy, but does that particular idea impact safety? If it does, and they can prove that it does, or take the position that it does, let's say that, for argument's sakes, they say that's a great idea, we'll draw it up, it works, it doesn't negatively impact safety. Now what's it going to cost? And they're going to put a number to it. And then they're going to ask us to pay for it, to build it. That seems to be the direction.
That's how that works.
That's how that works. So there's a lot of questions yet.
We've already paid a lot of money for that freeway out there.
So there's a lot of questions that are going to have to be addressed, and it's all going to continue now with the conversation on Wednesday.
How'd you make out on the north side of town then?
They decided Friday that alternative B, which was the mid option that we kind of thought they might, that's the one that they've selected as their preferred alternative. So it's not the full diamond interchange, it's not the abbreviated interchange, it was the middle of the three options that we looked at, alternative B. And it wasn't necessarily our preference on the EDA, but
I mean, it's a lot better than what they first started looking at.
Well,
I mean,
that first option, number B was a lot better, but not ideal.
right.
so
But it'll still get everything coming from the north side. It's going to get everything into us without having to mess around much. I don't think you can go wrong with that.
Well, and even from the south, B had northbound, southbound. It had everything covered. It was just different the way they were doing it.
The way the layout was.
Acceleration lane. So if you're coming out of Cannon Falls, you want to go north on 52, you're going to have a decent, it's almost 1,300 or 1,400 foot of acceleration lane to get back onto 52 going north.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to obviously get off much more safely coming south. So yeah, it's hard to argue that it's a bad idea, particularly given what we've got or what we were offered before.
Well, I think it's a definite plus for the park out there. I don't care what anybody says. That's going to be a lifesaver for out there, I think. That's going to make that whole end,
15, I think,
and if
wasn't
there was
it?
any
Yeah.
expansion to go on out there,
Well, there's a lot of times you see RVs and campers and everything else stuck trying to cross 52. So
well, even the semis when they're hauling the cattle over
Yeah.
there, you should see, if you want to see a mess, go out there early in the morning sometimes when them guys are coming in
yeah,
or leaving. It's a circus. And then I don't care what time of the day you go out there, there is 3 cars, and it must be the same 3 people every time. They line up in the center of that, and they just sit there in everybody's way where nobody can do anything. Usually at about 8:30 in the morning, always, guaranteed, it is a mess out there.
One timid driver and you're screwed.
Oh, yeah.
well, you should be a little intimidated when the traffic's moving at 75 miles an hour. I am. I've slowed down.
And those of us that live in Cannon Falls just don't use that at all.
Oh no, I use it. I just wait though. I'm probably that third car. just waiting, but I can't go anywhere either. There are 2 people in front of me. They were first.
When you hear my horn coming by.
I mentioned too that Kurt chose to resign from the planning commission, so
Oh.
we informed Robbie of that, and he is looking for a replacement for Kurt. So if you got any names of some people who like high pay, short hours, and lots of fun, we're looking for somebody. So.
Yeah, it's not too demanding. It's only one night out of the month.
We will have, I feel happy to report that since we've never had 4 public hearings the same night, we almost had 5. The 5th one will come to the next meeting.
Oh, no, we've had 4.
We had 4?
Oh yeah,
How controversial is it?
yeah, yeah. I think.
Well, I don't know yet. we were,
His silence speaks.
I don't know yet. We'll see. So you can adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
I've got a motion from Chanel and a second by Mr. Price to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.